Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." That single sentence explains something most people never think to connect. We tend to assume that aging is purely biological. Genes, sun exposure, sleep, diet, and yes, those matter. But Jung spent his life studying something else entirely: the way our inner psychological world shapes our outer reality. And when you start looking closely, you notice a pattern. Some people, despite the years on their birth certificate, seem to carry a kind of lightness. Their face doesn't hold the tension. Their eyes don't carry the exhaustion. They simply look younger than their age, not because of any cream or procedure, but because of how they've lived internally. In the next, I'm going to walk you through 7 psychological reasons, each rooted directly in Carl Jung's work, that explain why some people age more slowly in appearance than others. These aren't beauty tips. They're not skincare hacks. They're insights into the deep relationship between the unconscious mind and the physical body. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly what these people are doing differently and how you can start applying it yourself. Let's get into the first one. Number 1. They've made peace with their shadow. Jung introduced the idea of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we repress, deny, or refuse to face. Our anger, our envy, our fear, our shame. Most people spend enormous psychological energy keeping these parts hidden, not just from others, but from themselves. And that hidden effort is exhausting. It's a constant, low-level tension running in the background of a person's mind, day after day, year after year. Here's the connection to aging. Chronic psychological tension doesn't stay contained in the mind. It shows up in the body. It shows up in posture, in muscle tension, in the tightness around the jaw and the eyes, in shallow breathing, in poor sleep. Over years, this constant internal friction quite literally engraves itself onto a person's face and body. You've probably met people who seem to be carrying a permanent low-grade stress, even when nothing is currently wrong. That tension ages a person faster than time itself. People who have done the work of facing their shadow, who can honestly say, yes, I get jealous, yes, I get angry, yes, I have flaws, and I accept that, carry less of this hidden tension. There's nothing left to defend, nothing left to hide. And that absence of internal conflict shows up as a kind of visible ease. Their face isn't fighting a private war. Their body isn't holding years of suppressed emotion. This is why so many people who appear calm, at peace, and unguarded also appear, almost mysteriously, younger than their years. It's not mysterious at all once you understand the mechanism. It's the physical residue of psychological integration. Number 2. They've stayed connected to what Jung called the eternal child. Jung used the term puer aeternus, the eternal child, to describe an archetype present in all of us. The part of the psyche associated with curiosity, playfulness, wonder, and spontaneity. In its unhealthy form, this archetype can trap a person in irresponsibility, refusing to grow up. But in its healthy form, it's something entirely different. It's the capacity to stay curious about the world even as you take on adult responsibilities. It's the ability to laugh easily, to be delighted by small things, to approach life with openness instead of cynicism. Watch how people age differently depending on their relationship with this part of themselves. Some people, as they get older, let this archetype die completely. They become rigid, cynical, guarded. Every new idea gets met with suspicion. Every unfamiliar situation gets met with resistance. And this rigidity doesn't just show up in their attitude. It shows up in their face. A face that rarely lights up with genuine curiosity or delight develops a kind of frozen, guarded quality over time. The muscles that create warmth in an expression simply get less exercise. Compare that to people who, well into their 50s, 60s, and beyond, still ask questions like a child would, still get excited about new music, new ideas, new places. Their face has, quite literally, had more practice moving through the full range of human expression. Curiosity, delight, surprise, warmth. That practice keeps the face animated, alive, and expressive in a way that reads, to the observer, as youthful. Psychological aliveness translates directly into physical aliveness. Number 3. They live from individuation instead of the persona. We touched on this idea already, but it deserves its own explanation here. Jung described the persona as the social mask each of us wears, the version of ourselves adapted for public consumption. A certain amount of persona is necessary. It helps us function in society, but many people build their entire identity around the persona, spending their whole lives performing a role rather than living as themselves. This creates a specific and exhausting kind of psychological labor. Constantly managing an image, constantly calculating what to say, how to appear, what's expected. This performance requires ongoing vigilance, and that vigilance is depleting. It's the difference between resting in a chair you're comfortable in versus sitting rigidly upright the entire time because you're worried about how you look. Individuation, Jung's term for becoming a fully realized, authentic self, is the antidote. People further along in this process aren't performing constantly. They've stopped managing an external image so tightly because they're less concerned with how they're perceived and more grounded in who they actually are. This reduction in constant self-monitoring frees up an enormous amount of psychological energy that would otherwise be spent maintaining a mask. And once again, this shows up physically. People who are less anxious about how they're perceived tend to have more relaxed facial muscles, more natural movement, a more settled presence. There's a kind of ease to individuated people that reads, almost universally, as youthful vitality. Not because they're trying to look young, but because they're no longer performing at all. And that absence of performance removes an entire layer of chronic tension from their physical presence. Number 4. They process their emotions instead of storing them. Jung believed that unconscious material doesn't simply disappear if it's ignored. It has to go somewhere. Emotions that aren't processed, understood, or expressed get stored. In dreams, in symptoms, in the body itself. This is one of the foundational ideas connecting depth psychology to physical health. The unconscious speaks through the body when it isn't allowed to speak through conscious awareness. Consider grief that was never properly grieved, anger that was swallowed instead of expressed, fear that was pushed down instead of examined. Over years, this accumulation of unprocessed emotional material takes a toll, not just mentally, but physically. Chronic unresolved emotion is strongly linked to elevated stress hormones, disrupted sleep, inflammation, and a whole cascade of physiological effects that accelerate visible aging. The body keeps a record, even when the conscious mind has moved on. People who look younger than their age often have something in common. They deal with things. They don't let resentment calcify for a decade. They don't bottle grief until it becomes a permanent weight they carry. Whether through therapy, journaling, honest conversation, or simply a willingness to sit with difficult feelings instead of avoiding them, they metabolize their emotional experiences instead of storing them indefinitely. And a nervous system that isn't constantly managing a backlog of unprocessed material simply ages differently than one that is. Number 5. They've found meaning, not just routine. In the second half of his career, Jung worked extensively with patients who had achieved external success, money, status, stability, and were still deeply unhappy. He came to believe that a significant portion of psychological suffering, especially later in life, comes from a lack of meaning rather than a lack of comfort. People can have everything they need materially and still feel like they're merely existing rather than truly living. This matters for aging because meaning functions almost like a form of psychological nourishment. People who wake up with a sense of purpose, a project they care about, a relationship that matters deeply to them, a craft they're devoted to, a cause bigger than themselves, carry a kind of internal engagement that shows up as vitality. Their eyes have something behind them. Their energy has direction. Contrast this with people who are simply going through the motions, waking up, working, sleeping, repeating, with no deeper thread connecting their days to anything they actually care about. This kind of existential flatness has a draining effect that, over years, becomes visible. A life lived on autopilot tends to produce a kind of dullness, not from age itself, but from the absence of engagement. People who look youthful, energized, and alive well into later decades are almost always people who have something to wake up for. Meaning is not just a philosophical nicety. It's a psychological fuel source, and its absence or presence is written on a person's face. Number 6. They treat change as growth, not threat. Jung's entire model of psychological development rests on the idea of transformation. The psyche is meant to keep evolving throughout life, not settle into a fixed, final form somewhere in early adulthood. He rejected the common assumption that psychological development ends once we become adults. In his view, real growth continues well into midlife and beyond, provided the person remains open to it. This openness to change is a defining trait among people who seem to defy their age. When life shifts, a career change, a relationship ending, a health scare, a move to a new city, some people experience this as a threat to be resisted at all costs. They cling to familiarity, resist new circumstances, and effectively try to freeze their identity in place. This resistance creates chronic internal friction between what is and what a person insists should be. Others treat the same disruptions as opportunities for growth. They ask, "What is this teaching me? Who might I become because of this?" This orientation keeps a person psychologically flexible rather than brittle. And flexibility, much like the eternal child archetype we discussed earlier, keeps a person engaged with life rather than defended against it. Rigid people, bracing constantly against an ever-changing world, tend to carry a tightness that ages them. Flexible people, moving with life's changes instead of fighting them, tend to carry an ease that preserves them. Number 7. They engage their creative and symbolic imagination. Jung placed enormous importance on what he called active imagination, deliberately engaging with the symbolic, creative, and imaginative parts of the mind rather than letting them go dormant. This might look like painting, writing, music, storytelling, even daydreaming with intention. For Jung, creative engagement wasn't a luxury reserved for artists. It was a fundamental psychological need, a way the unconscious communicates and integrates itself into conscious life. People who maintain some form of creative or symbolic practice throughout their lives tend to stay mentally supple in a way that resists the common narrowing that happens with age. Their minds keep generating new connections, new images, new ideas, instead of settling into rigid, repetitive patterns. And this mental aliveness is deeply connected to physical presence. A mind that's actively creating tends to animate a face and body differently than a mind that has gone quiet and repetitive. This is part of why so many artists, musicians, and lifelong creators seem to carry a distinct vibrancy well into old age. It's not just genetics or luck. It's the ongoing exercise of imagination, keeping something alive internally that, in people who've stopped creating altogether, tends to go dim. Creativity, in the Jungian sense, isn't about producing masterpieces. It's about keeping a channel open between the conscious and unconscious mind, and that open channel appears to keep a person visibly, tangibly more alive. So let's bring all 7 of these together. They've made peace with their shadow, releasing the hidden tension of self-denial. They've stayed connected to the eternal child, preserving curiosity and warmth. They live from individuation rather than persona, freeing themselves from the exhausting labor of constant performance. They process their emotions instead of storing them, preventing years of unresolved material from settling into the body. They've found meaning beyond routine, fueling themselves with genuine purpose. They treat change as growth rather than threat, staying flexible instead of brittle. And they keep their creative imagination engaged, maintaining a kind of internal aliveness that resists the common flattening of age. Notice what's absent from this list. Not one of these 7 reasons is about a skincare routine, a supplement, or a cosmetic procedure. Every single one is about the relationship a person has with their own inner world. That's really the deeper insight hidden inside Jung's psychology, and it's one worth sitting with. How you age isn't only written into your genes. It's also written into how honestly you face yourself, how much you process rather than suppress, and how alive you keep your inner world year after year. If any part of this resonated with you, I'd encourage you to sit with a simple question this week. Which of these 7 is the one you've neglected the most? For some people, it's facing the shadow. For others, it's finding meaning again. For others, it's simply letting themselves be curious about something new. Wherever you start, the work is the same work Jung described nearly a century ago. The slow, honest process of becoming whole. And based on everything we've just covered, it might be one of the most overlooked paths to looking and feeling genuinely younger. If this video gave you a new way of thinking about Jung's psychology, let me know in the comments which of these 7 points stood out to you the most. And if you want more videos exploring Jung's ideas, the shadow, the persona, individuation, the archetypes, and how they apply to real, everyday life, make sure you're subscribed, because that's exactly what this channel is built around. I'll see you in the next one.